Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Half-White Album by Cynthia J. Sylvester, narrated by Cynthia Sylvester. For Mom and Dad. In every conceivable manner, the family is linked to our past, bridged to our future. Alex Haley. I love beautiful melodies telling me terrible things. Tom Waits. In beauty, my mother, for you I return. Jeannie J. The covers formed in 1963, the year Patsy Cline and Kennedy died. They like to say they've been on the road so long they put the mad in nomad. The covers are Jeannie J., lead vocals, cowbell, and tambourine; Mr., acoustic, electric, and slide guitars; One Foot, drums and percussion; Akide Najika, bass guitar; the New Mexico Women's Correctional Facility Choir, backup vocals on Brain Damage. Without music, life would be a blank to me. Jane Austen. This is what I want in heaven, words to become notes and conversations to be symphonies. Tina Turner. The House of Towers was downtown. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never find it. That seemed to be the case when we pulled in that night. Even though we were running late, there were only 3 cars in the parking lot. A storm had followed us since we left Thoreau, and now it sat over our heads as the Econoline shuddered to a stop. Then the sky cracked open and we saw the back door. It looked like a giant silver tooth in an otherwise empty mouth. Mister had a bad feeling, but we're the covers. We're like the postman, come rain or shine. So with zigzagged lightning all around us, we grabbed some of our gear and ran toward the door. One Foot. Live at the House of Towers. Intro, comfortably numb. She walked slowly and softly around the sturdy oak table in the formal dining room. The clawfoot pedestal legs seemed particularly vicious this time of the month. A delicate lace tablecloth was barely visible beneath a pile of bills slit open at their sides with the precision of a butcher and situated on the table in a constellation that made sense only to her. As the Pythagorean theorem or the law of relativity does to some, as a recipe for pineapple upside-down cake does to others, something can be made of it, but only by certain people. A letter opener her brother-in-law brought back from Korea lay next to the freshest bill. The long red tassel had faded over the past 40 years, but not the hand-painted picture of the little man who stood in his boat, never losing his balance, still hoping for a lucky fishing day. She took a deep breath, left the dining room, rummaged through the desk in the kitchen. The lamp above the desk had lost its fluted cover, and a single bulb burned brightly, exposing a few cobwebs that hung loosely to and from the phone, like a flimsy hammock. She opened the drawer and pulled out a pen she already knew didn't work. The ink had dried up years ago, 39 to be exact, if she counted backward from today, past her divorce through the years. Back when there was a roast beef cooking in that oven that hadn't worked in 5 years, when her children were outside running in a sky turning pink. Snotty-nosed and red-cheeked, they'd burst in with her husband returning from work with a similar charcoal black pen with U.S. government stamped on the side sticking out of his front shirt pocket. If she closed her eyes, she could still smell the Avon aftershave on it, but she simply turned it over in her hand, the same way she turned over the past, never looking at it directly, but out of her peripheral vision. She placed it back in the desk drawer along with nubby crayons, rubber bands, paper clips, a watch that hadn't worked in at least 2 years, a keychain from the Golden Gate Casino, and a small plastic pink high-heel shoe from her daughter's Barbie doll. She sold the doll along with Barbie's brunette cousin Francie, the red-headed Stacy, and Barbie's beach house for $99 to an obese woman whose number she had found in the thrifty nickel. She swiped half-heartedly at the cobwebs that blew in front of her over the 2007 Elvis calendar. The picture was one of her favorites from the Aloha from Hawaii via satellite concert he'd recorded before that unfortunate heart attack. It really was a better time to clean than to make out bills. It was getting late, and her eyes burned, even during the day, over the small numbers. The ancient furnace in the garage kicked on, blowing its warm, dusty breath through the vents in the kitchen. The rumble of it sounded like her son's 2-stroke mini-bike on its way home. foolish. Her children were grown now. Her stomach drew inward, as it often did this time of the day, when the light faded and the bills began to disappear, devoured by the benevolent lion of a table in the dimming light. She clutched her stomach unconsciously. Nobody knew what this was like, the feeling in her stomach, not even the doctors who examined her with scopes and radiographs. Maybe the security guard at the entrance to the casino knew, or the server who brought her coffee at her favorite machine, the Wheel of Fortune, at 2 a.m. Maybe they understood that she could feel the subtle temperature change in the machine that was ready to pay. Maybe they had seen her move along them with the deft fingers of a blind person or a TV evangelist touching the foreheads of the sick. Maybe they knew that tonight could be her lucky night. She had the faith of the little fisherman on the letter opener. She believed that the night swallowed the day, and then there was no past, just a single moment when all was new. Her car keys hung on the cork message board that said, "Welcome." They winked at her as she reached for them and switched off the light. The constellation of bills shifted in the dark of the dining room as she put on her coat. Outside, the evening star twinkled. The neighbor's dog barked as she walked to the gate. Smiling, she said to the dog, "Oh, Ma'i, you coyote," even though the dog looked to be half Chihuahua and half Beagle. "You don't like to stay home either." She opened the gate and pulled her car out. She told her dogs to stay there and watch the place. But as she drove away, Ma'i slipped through an opening in his fence, and her dogs followed. They all chased her down the road, barking. Across the river, her daughter sat bundled up at her weakening fire. The propane tank that fueled it was nearly empty. She held a beer in her gloved hands, watching the evening star get brighter and brighter. She had stared at that star, which wasn't really a star, her whole life. It, in turn, stared back at her, seeming to know her better than she knew herself. At times she felt tethered to it, tied too tightly, perhaps. It tugged at a place deep inside her. She tried to bend her ear toward that place, near her navel, where she'd been experiencing discomfort. If only she had done more yoga, Juno Sirsasana pose, and drank less of these. She looked at the Ducati and finished it. She could get to that place more easily. Try meditation, her therapist had suggested. Fast, the curandera had advised, after a treatment with a raw egg. The fragrance of roses had wafted through the small apartment as the woman rubbed the egg over her naked body. She had sat wrapped in a towel as the curandera cracked the egg open. Its contents slid into a bowl that could just as easily have held Captain Crunch cereal. They had peered at the egg. The curandera looked up at her warily. "You're holding on too tightly." She peered into the same bowl and only saw the beginnings of an omelet. She fasted, and still her stomach continued to call to her with sharp pains. Not appendicitis, not gallstones, not a heart attack. "You're fine," her doctor had told her, adding kindly, "Maybe lose a little weight and lay off the beer and spicy food." What else was there, she wanted to ask? The doctor gave her a prescription for Prilosec that she never filled. Fasting, meditating, more Juno Sirsasana, and no red or green chili, but it didn't help. Tears formed in her eyes as she stared at the stars, joined now by its relations. They whispered to one another and sizzled in the night sky. She stayed looking until the fire died and the cold drove her in. The chimes on the back door, the one she'd picked up at the Goodwill, a little tinkle of bells, made her pause in the kitchen. The sound continued even though the bells weren't moving, tinkling like the bells of the sheep as they were herded over the hills at the base of the red mesas where her mother was born. She thought often of her mother's mother, whom she'd never met. She'd passed away in the Albuquerque Indian Hospital with TB before she was born. Her parents had followed the train that took her back home to the Den-Etat. Home. To her, home smelled like dust and dogs and sweetbread and caressed soap, like celery and onions sautéing in butter, like smoke twirling up from ashtrays as cards or stories were laid down, like exhaust from mini-bikes and lawnmowers pushed through weeds, not grass. It tasted like gas siphoned from that same lawnmower to put in her Ford Pinto because she'd come home on empty again. She laughed out loud. She'd call her mom. She wanted to tell her the Lobos were playing BYU tomorrow night. They hadn't been to a game together in a long time because they were both broke. Maybe they could listen to it on KKOB. Maybe they could play Uno or Rummy, even though it wasn't much fun with just two people. The phone rang and rang in her mom's kitchen, rang until she finally hung up. It was 9 o'clock. She hoped her mom just hadn't heard the phone because her hearing aids weren't in, or didn't answer because she still wasn't talking to her daughter, who had suggested after shuffling through the bills on her mom's table, maybe she should stop going to the casino. In turn, her mother had looked at her daughter's belly and suggested maybe she should stop drinking so much beer. She turned on the stereo. On Coyote 102.5, Sammy Hagar was singing about where eagles fly. She clicked on the desk lamp. It glowed yellow, illuminating stacks of books and papers on her desk, typed pages in manila folders, the same stories written and rewritten, books amassed through the years, The Sacred Hoop, Navajo Made Easier, Bad Indians, Spider-Woman's Granddaughters, The Second Long Walk, The Half-Blood, Almanac of the Dead, academic writings, anthologies, novels, collections of short stories and poems, and historical texts, including her mom's yearbooks with aged newspaper clippings folded inside. As a whole, they had become a hazy collage of words, photos, and facts, whispers and memories and dreams she was trying to piece together. She picked a book from the top of a stack. It was published in 1902. Printed in 8-point font, she rubbed her eyes. She skipped past the captions, ceremony and rites, season, expense, origin. And like a child with a picture book, she looked for that one drawing she loved the most. Finely detailed, probably done in pencil. It was of a man in loose-fitting pants and shirt with a blanket draped over his shoulders, standing outside a medicine lodge looking east. She knew it was east because the door to the lodge faced that direction, but also she knew that place and that the mesa was to the west. She looked at the drawing for some time. She'd given up long ago trying to comprehend the complex ceremony described in great detail in the book. It was composed of hundreds of songs, sacred arts and tools, and stories that took a medicine man a lifetime to learn. To fully understand the ceremony, she'd need to understand the worldview, and to understand the worldview, she'd need to know the language, and she only knew enough of the Diné language to say, "Pass the salt, come and eat," and to introduce herself, to say, "I was born from my mother's 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 clan, and we're from this place." If she had colored pencils or crayons, she could fill in the sun descending behind the red sandstone mesa, the coral and ecru-hued hills speckled with sage and greasewood that rolled into the dunes and spilled into the flat of the wash where corn used to grow. She'd add an elm tree her grandfather planted to shade the little sandstone house. Then it would be the place her mother was born. She put the book down and typed home. She wrote that home smelled like dust and dogs and sweetbread and caress soap. She wrote that it was a place that knew her better than she knew it. She wrote about the fragrance of Russian olive trees in the spring and alfalfa in the summer, of wood smoke and coffee at dawn, about the sound of sheep bells and the barking of old dogs, about black crows and arrows and shadows, about being dead and not knowing it. Her fingers tapped on the keys like ancient dancers of an even older ceremony performed only in the winter. Moccasined feet lightly touched the ground as her fingers tapped out stories, her songs, her prayers, her offering. For how many nights, how many years had she sat and tapped on that keyboard, her fingers walking a zigzag path toward a medicine lodge at the base of the red mesas, where a supine patient lay on a dry painting made from multicolored sand. The patient could be her, it could be her mom or her grandmother or her cousin. She walked ahead of the medicine women and men who were arriving to administer to seen and unseen wounds, ahead of the day keepers in nurses' scrubs, stethoscopes around their necks with which to monitor the strength of the patient's heart during those winter nights. She walked to the doors of their many houses with her offering. She walked with the acknowledgement that parts of her were not Njonade, not walking in beauty, and with parts of her that felt chindi or taboo. Tears plopped onto her desk, an offering for the parts of her that felt like they had been struck by lightning. This is my sand painting, this paper black on white. These pieces, poems, and stories are my songs that I offer to the night sky with the hope that at dawn the ancient deities will see me, see us, and remember our names. I'm Kia'ani Nishle, Bilagana Bashishchin. Maybe she could walk between whirls. Maybe she could walk where lightning had struck and find that the path between black and white and this and that was just the zigzagged path of lightning. Find that they weren't cast out, but led to this side of the river and born into this place called Beth Dildasanel, where the bell sits up high. It is on that zigzagged path she wanders now and looks up into the black sky of her heart, into the hole, and wonders, will their losses ever be recovered, or is this hole an opening from where the journey begins? What is this world coming to? Ozzy Osbourne. I might have been queen. There are no words in this language to translate her name, a name that stretches back to the time with no time, then flashes forward 10,000 years. But you should know that her name is like the warm touch of fingers on your forearm when you're afraid or lost, that it smells like a late spring morning in the valley when the Russian olives are in bloom, the coffee done perking. It tastes like the fatty edge of meat butchered with the knife of a warrior, salty and crisp, flecked with bits of sand that stick between our big white front teeth, sand that blows across the dunes over by the old house, uncovering pottery shards that refuse to remain buried. Boulevard of Broken Dreams. With a blanket across her broad shoulders and a shawl covering her head, with ants dreaming still furled on cool sand, sprinkling corn pollen on the path ahead of her, she walked. Past the well where the old buzzard still slept, his head tucked under a molted wing, across the dunes toward the hills emerging from shadow, she walked. Focusing her mind on moist yellow corn tassels from the abundance of rain in a summer that was almost past now, she walked. Shawl tied around her ears, not against the chill of dawn, but from the thoughts that crept in like the day was creeping over the hills she walked. And despite the beauty above her, below her, the beauty all around her, her thoughts turned to the smoke that walked beside her. Smoke she tried to push away, to think away, as she walked. Across the dunes, to her field of plenty, she walked. The last one. Shema had started at dawn, harvesting, cutting, then grinding kernels of corn into a sweet paste. Now she patted the last of the gooey substance into husks, folding and tying the loaves of bread with tired fingers. She stood slowly, hips and knees sore from kneeling for so long. She looked to the east, hoping to see her husband on his way home. It was work that was supposed to be done with other women, with her daughters, with laughter and song. But her relatives weren't able to come and help, and all her daughters were away. She hadn't complained that her husband was leaving too, making the overnight trip to the trading post. He had taken some of their goods, sheepskins, wool, and 2 blankets she'd woven, to trade for winter stock. She wasn't upset that he'd left at this time, when the corn was still young and juicy enough to make bread, because he promised that on his way home he'd stop at the mission boarding school and check on their daughters. She was anxious to hear how they were, especially her youngest. Nothing moved on the horizon. The sparrows held still in the sagebrush, the lizards lazed on hot rocks. Even her sheepdogs, a crew of 3 mutts, were too hot to chase rabbits into their holes. They dozed under greasewoods that provided growing shade as the sun laid down its head on the red mesa. As if on cue, the breeze that always came up with the sunset rustled her long skirt, reminding her in its tickle of cloth on leg to stop worrying and finish the bread before it got dark. To emphasize that point, the old buzzard that hung around at the well began his slow descent, his hollow bones hopefully warmed enough to make it through the cool August night. Shema picked up the shovel and stirred the coals in the pit fire she'd built at noon. The embers were hot. She removed the larger chunks of wood and placed them on a flat piece of metal she'd found several years ago buried in the sand dunes. It was the hood of an old car. She and the mule her youngest had named Hell pulled it out and drug it home. As she looked at her earth oven, Shema thought about what her daughter had told her, that the kitchen at the boarding school was the only thing she liked, that and the radio in the basement where she worked doing laundry. She said the radio crackled like a fire and hummed with songs that came from far away, and the ovens lit with the snap of fingers. She said they made bread with sugar and yeast, bread that rose up like a big moon over the side of the bowl. Shema kneeled at her earth oven, looked at her bread made from ground corn. It had been all-day work, and she had 6 dozen loaves that looked like faceless dolls, maidens in stiff dresses. She picked up a loaf, looked at it, and said, "Are you little ladies going to rise like the moon under this old hood?" Her face burned, and she squinted her eyes against the heat that immediately curled the bottoms of the maidens' dresses as she laid them side by side. Shema hummed a song, adding it to the bread. As the sun descended slowly, her song was a sort of lullaby to the little cornhusk ladies, as if they were her children. One by one she put them in the oven, just as her own children had been taken to the mission school, one by one. Shema had 6 daughters, and she had named the last one, the last one. She did this because she swore that that child would be the last one she'd push out into the world, just to be swallowed up by the missionaries or the government. It's not as if she didn't understand that they had to go to school. It's that they took them with the purpose of changing them. Yes, we all change, she agreed with her husband when they argued about the boarding school, but it was how they changed. Each time she took a child there to live, she studied them, tried to remember what they had been like, because the next time she saw them, their long hair would be cut short, their long skirts and blouses with silver buttons would be replaced with short light blue dresses, their faces no longer full, their eyes distant. The last one was born ornery and independent, so much so that she was more often than not in trouble at home, too. She'd get on a horse that wasn't yet broken or take the sheep farther than told, so that she and the sheep didn't get home until well after dark. Shema thought that the last one would face her new future with the same bravery, but instead, when Shema took her to the school, she'd clutched Shema's leg and buried her face in Shema's skirt to hide her tears. Shema had knelt in front of her and whispered into the top of her sweet, sweaty head. Shh. She had pointed to the mesa that was behind her now. If you stand right here and look that way, see, right there, that's where you're from. You'll see the smoke from my fire, and I can see you, so be good, be strong, she told her and herself. Little did she know that her daughter would stand at that spot every day looking for smoke. Smoke rose up from the coals now as Shema pulled the hood over the pit, over the little ladies. I'll see you soon. She stood and dusted dirt from her skirt. The dogs had snuck off while she loaded the oven, and now they barked from the other side of the hill. It was the bark usually reserved for her daughter, the last one. She called for them. They ran toward her as a mule with a rider plodded over the hill. The dogs circled Shema, then took off once again. In the saddle was a small man, and behind him rode a child, a girl. Shema dropped her shovel. Even though they were still a distance away, she knew it was her, and her heart dropped into her stomach. She was supposed to be at school. They, Shema, the last one, and Claude, Shema's husband, had all been warned less than a month ago that if she ran away again, they, the government, would send her farther away. Shema looked around to see if anyone else was coming, thankful that as far as the eye could see there was nothing, and that the long shadow of the mesa was beginning to cover them. She walked to the trough and began to pump the well until she could hear Slim singing and could see the last one's blue school dress bunched up past her knees. Her brown legs dangled, socks loose at her ankles, school boots untied. The mule upped his gait to a trot, which roused her daughter. She lifted her head, saw Shema at the well, and slid off the mule, dropped to the ground, and ran to her mother. She hugged her. Shema placed her hand on the top of her head, rubbed her cheek, and turned down the white collar of her dress, still as stiff as a corn husk. "What are you doing here?" Shema asked. The last one dug her strong hands into Shema's waist. Shema and Slim nodded in greeting. He removed his sweat-stained hat. "I found your daughter walking alone in the wash like a stray dog." The mule stuck his nose into the water, and the last one rubbed his sweaty neck. Shema pumped a ladle of water for Slim. He took it, his brown hands weathered and arthritic. His chest and hips were a little bonier than the last time Shema had seen him. After a long drink, Slim said, "Clyde's on his way back." Shema didn't ask where he'd seen him. Slim was known for wandering around looking for card games. As if he could read her mind, he laughed, "At the trading post, working." He took on a stern face, unnatural for him, and pointed the empty ladle at the last one. "I told her she's going to get lost out there." He directed the ladle to the hills that rolled one after the other toward the Chusca Mountains, or the coyotes will track her down like a sheep and get her. She said she wasn't scared. He shook his head. I'm not, the last one said. He pointed the ladle at her again. I told her, then they will send her away, far away, where she won't find her way back so easy, like my grandson. You know what she said to that? He handed the ladle back to Shema. The mule picked up his wet nose up out of the trough, as if he were listening too. She said that the smoke from her mother's fire would always find her. The mule snorted, shooting water and mucus onto the last one's blue dress. Shema looked at her daughter, who was looking at the mule, who was looking at Shema. That's what they told her. We told her, too. And now he's telling you, daughter. She didn't want to think about how she'd made it as far as the wash. The school was over 30 miles away. She had run away 3 times now. The first time, she'd hidden in the back of one of the school trucks headed to the trading post at Kienta and walked the last 10 miles home. The last time, Shema was informed by her in-laws that the last one had been helped by an old woman on an even older horse. That time it took them 9 days to get her back to the school. She had been gone so long that the officials were glad to see she hadn't been killed or eaten or kidnapped, Slim said. Back in my day, the Mexicans might kidnap you, or the Apaches might take off with you, or leave you and take your horse, or worse yet, you might get found by the soldiers and taken to the place of sorrow. A small vein was beginning to stick up on Slim's forehead, raising up despite the indentation from the hat band. Shema rubbed the mule's neck. We've told her and told her. She thinks she knows. She's stubborn like Claude. Father said it was Mother that was stubborn. Shh, Shema said. Go get Slim some corn. Go. She watched her run, waiting for her to trip over her untied shoelaces. She turned to Slim. I don't know what to do. She felt like burying her face in the long neck of the stinking mule and crying, but she didn't. Instead, she asked Slim to stay for dinner. It's too late to be out wandering around. Your wife would be angry with you. His wife had passed 10 years earlier with tuberculosis. There's a dance not too far from here. The last one ran back with the corn in a burlap sack. She handed it to her mother, who put it in the saddlebag on the mule. They sent my grandson to Carlisle, he told her. He liked to run around with me, so I guess it's for the best. He tried to laugh. Shema didn't think that at all. Thank you, Slim. Thank you for bringing my daughter home. She knew there wasn't anyone around for miles, no dances, no poker games. Tell Claude to come see me this winter, he smiled, only a few teeth left. He was one of the few men who still knew how to play the moccasin game. Tell him to bring one of your blankets and some sheepskins. He laughed and then began to cough. He rubbed the mule behind one long ear and nudged his belly with his short legs. The mule didn't budge. Nobody listens to me anymore, he said. He pulled the reins to one side, and the mule knew it was no use and turned his head toward the road. Slim clicked his tongue, then looked at Shema. They'll come for her. Shema placed her hand on top of the last one's head, and they watched him and the mule head back onto the road and away from her home. She tried to smooth the last one's hair down, but a rebellion was in her hair. It stuck up like a puppy's. Shema took water and smoothed it, the bangs sticking to her damp forehead. I should have named you Fuzzyhead. Then she knelt and hugged her. She wiped the dust from her face with the hem of her skirt. It was just her and her daughter and the old buzzard. The dogs would follow Slim for a while, hoping he'd drop some food. You heard him, didn't you? You can't keep doing this. She should tell her now. You know you have to go back. You know that you can't stay. She should scold her, dole out punishment. But those words were too hard right now. And how would she punish her further? The worst punishment for her was already what she would get, whether she behaved or not. She watched her daughter pick up a stink bug. She was 10 now, but she still liked bugs and dogs and mules. The bug crawled up her arm. Shema looked closely. It left little yellow marks on her daughter's brown arm. Corn pollen. It must have traveled along the pollen trail Shema had made that morning when she went into her field to harvest, sprinkling pollen in front of her. Maybe it was a good sign. Maybe, she thought. She took her daughter's hand and they walked to the house. You're lucky your father isn't here. I'd be sleeping with the sheep tonight. Thankfully, it was getting dark, so the last one couldn't see Shema smile. With the goats. They walked past the oven. When will your bread be ready? Soon. Shema hoped that baking under an August twilight wouldn't make the little maidens taste like longing. Shema made the last one fetch water for a bath, and she heated it on the wood stove. Juniper popped and cracked. She made her daughter sit still in the tub long enough to wash her feet and scrub under her nails. Shema scrubbed her head for her while she squirmed. The light from the oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls in the sandstone cabin.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?